Okay, get ready because we're taking a trip today back to ancient Greece. We're going to be talking about Homer's Iliad.
Oh, yeah. One of the great ones.
Definitely a classic. I think most people know at least the basics of the Trojan War, but I'm sure there's some stuff beyond just like Helen of Troy.
Oh, absolutely. And it's amazing how relevant the Iliad still is, even thousands of years later.
Right.
I mean, we might not live in a world of epic battles and, gods meddling in our affairs, but
Right.
it's really about war and honor and fate and human nature. I mean, these are themes that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, definitely timeless. Okay, so let's break down this epic. The Iliad focuses on just this like small period within the larger Trojan War, right?
Yeah, that's right. So instead of starting at the very beginning, Homer kind of drops us right into the middle of the action.
Oh, okay.
It's about 10 years into the siege of Troy already.
Wow.
And it's a technique called in medias res. So, by starting right in the middle of things, Homer really grabs our attention and kind of immerses us in the emotional intensity of the story.
I like that. No long backstory to wade through.
Exactly.
Okay, so for those who maybe haven't read it in a while, can you give us like the quick version of the plot?
Sure. The story is really all about the wrath of Achilles. He's like, the greatest warrior
Mm.
in the Greek army. And he's furious with Agamemnon. He's the Greek leader because Agamemnon has taken Briseis, who's a woman who was a prize of war for Achilles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's a huge insult to his honor. And so Achilles decides, well, I'm not going to fight anymore.
He's sitting this one out.
Yeah, and of course that puts the whole Greek army at risk.
I'd imagine so. So I'm guessing with their best fighter, just like chilling, things aren't going too well for the Greeks.
No, not at all. So with Achilles just sulking in his tent, the Trojans, led by Hector, who is, this noble figure, they start winning. They're gaining ground, and Patroclus, who's Achilles' best friend, he can't take it anymore.
Right.
So he decides to put on Achilles' armor and go into battle, hoping to like scare the Trojans.
Like a fake out.
Yeah, basically, but it really backfires. Hector, he sees Patroclus in this armor and thinks it's Achilles and end up killing him in a duel.
Oh no. That's got to be tough for Achilles. So what does he do?
Yeah, it's devastating. I mean, Achilles is overwhelmed with grief and rage. And so now he decides to rejoin the fighting. Of course, now he wants revenge. And he's armed with this incredible new armor made for him by Hephaestus, the god of the forge.
Wow. Okay.
And his shield, is described in these like incredible details. It's almost like it's not just armor, it's a work of art.
Right.
It's got all these scenes of peace and war on it and constellations, even the cycle of life and death. It's like this microcosm of the whole world, at least as the Greeks understood it.
That's amazing. Okay, so Achilles is back, and I bet he's not messing around. What happens?
Well, he just becomes this unstoppable force, cutting through the Trojan ranks, just looking for Hector, and of course they eventually clash. And their fight is one of the most gripping scenes, really emotionally charged.
Yeah, I bet. So does Achilles get his revenge?
He does. He kills Hector, but it's bittersweet because he's still consumed by rage, and in this act of brutality, he drags Hector's body around the walls of Troy, and he refuses to give it back to Priam, who's Hector's father, so they can't bury him properly.
Wow. That's pretty intense. I mean, even for a hero, that seems a little much. It makes you think about like what does it actually mean to be a hero?
Right. It's a good question. I mean, is Achilles really a hero if he's so driven by rage and vengeance? It's one of the things that makes the Iliad so interesting. You're really forced to consider different ideas about heroism.
Right. Like he's this force of nature, capable of great things, but also terrible destruction. So how does all this epic conflict, like how does it finally end?
Well, Priam, he's heartbroken, obviously, and he's desperate to get his son's body back. So he goes to Achilles' tent and begs for it. And in this moment of like, real empathy, Achilles gives in. He kind of realizes that, they're both experiencing this incredible grief.
Yeah.
And so he returns Hector's body to Priam. And the poem ends with Hector's funeral. It's just this somber reminder of how devastating war is, even for the winners.
Wow. It sounds like there's just so much to unpack here.
Oh, yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the big themes that Homer is weaving into this story.
Sure.
One of the first things that jumps out is how the gods are portrayed.
Right.
They're not these like distant figures. They're very involved in everything that's happened.
They're very involved. And they're not these like perfect beings either.
Right.
They act like humans in a lot of ways.
Right.
They, play favorites, they fight with each other. It's they're this dysfunctional family.
Yeah, it's like they're a reflection of us, but like on this grander scale.
Yeah, exactly. The gods, with all their flaws and passions, they're like a mirror to human nature.
Right. I mean, jealousy, power struggles, that's all the stuff we still deal with today.
Absolutely.
No wonder this story has resonated for so long.
Yeah.
What about this whole concept of fate that kind of hangs over everything?
Yeah, fate or destiny is a constant presence in the Iliad. Characters talk about, their fates being predetermined by the gods, and that raises these questions about free will.
Right.
Do our choices really matter if our destinies are already, set in stone?
Yeah, that's a question that people have been grappling with forever.
Yeah.
I'd imagine the ancient Greeks really struggled with that one. I mean, what about Kleos? I know that's like a big deal in the Iliad.
It is. Kleos is often translated as glory,
Hmm.
but it's more than just fame.
Right.
It's about achieving this like everlasting glory through your deeds. It's what will make you be remembered and celebrated
Okay.
for generations to come.
So for the warriors, it was like the ultimate goal.
Yes, Kleos was like a way to become immortal.
Interesting. So it's not just about like winning the battle. It's about winning in a way that makes you a legend.
Exactly. And a warrior's Kleos was really tied to their honor and their reputation. It's what motivated them to risk their lives in battle, knowing that it could be their last day.
It's a very different way of thinking about success and heroism than we have today.
It is.
Makes you think, how much their worldview influenced the choices they made.
Yeah, and Kleos is really it's woven through the entire epic. You see how it affects their decisions and their fates.
Okay, we're definitely just scratching the surface here, but I want to make sure we have time to talk about the actual warfare.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we have these epic battles, heroic duels, all this detailed descriptions of weapons and armor. But how much of that is like rooted in reality? How much is actual Bronze Age warfare and how much is just like poetic license?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we have to remember that the Iliad is an epic poem.
Right.
It's not a history book.
So maybe a bit of dramatic exaggeration.
For sure. I mean, Homer's goal was to tell a compelling story,
Right.
to entertain his audience. And some of the details, like, the focus on those individual combats and duels might have been play up a little bit.
Okay, so maybe not every battle was a one-on-one showdown. But what about the weapons and armor? What did they use?
Well, Homer goes into a lot of detail about that stuff, and a lot of it is probably accurate. Like, for example, the shields. They were huge, like tall enough to hide behind.
Wow.
Yeah, they were made of layers of ox hide, reinforced with bronze, and they often had these like elaborate scenes on them, mini works of art.
Like mobile murals. That's pretty cool.
And of course, you have the spears. That was the main weapon, both for throwing and for close combat. And Homer describes them in detail. The wood used for the shaft and the bronze spearheads.
You can almost picture it, the clash of the bronze.
Right. And then, of course, the swords. They're usually described as double-edged, kind of leaf-shaped, and designed for, thrusting and slashing.
It just sounds so brutal. The clash of shields and the fury of the warriors. It's very different from how we imagine war today.
Yeah, very different. It was much more chaotic
Right.
and personal.
Okay, but one thing that's always bugged me, if Mycenae and Troy were these, like, seafaring people,
Right.
why is everything on land? Like, where are all the epic sea battles?
It's a good question. There are some theories, but maybe Homer just thought those weren't as exciting to describe.
Right.
I mean, who wants to hear about naval maneuvers?
Not as dramatic.
Or maybe he was just following a tradition of storytelling that focused on, the land battles, even if naval warfare was a big part of the actual war.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much is based on fact versus fiction.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of what makes the Iliad so fascinating. It's this blend of history and myth.
Yeah, I agree.
It gives us a peek into this world that's long gone, but at the same time, it's got these timeless themes and characters that we're still drawn to.
Exactly.
It really is. It's like, you can never pin it down.
Right. Speaking of things we can't pin down, what about those other characters? The Iliad has so many interesting,
Oh, it's full of them.
yeah,
Full of these characters that just add so much to the story.
yeah, so much depth. So let's start with Nestor.
Okay.
He's like the wise old man.
He is like the grandpa of the Greek army, always giving advice.
Right.
Nestor is the king of Pylos, represents, wisdom and experience, fought in countless battles. And he's always, urging the younger guys to think before you act, learn from the past.
Right. Advice that maybe some of them should have listened to.
Yeah, a lot of times it fell on deaf ears, but he's there to remind us that, experience matters.
Right. Think about the consequences. So he's the voice of caution. Okay, what about Odysseus?
Ah, Odysseus, he's different.
Yeah, he's more of a strategist.
Yeah, he's not, the biggest or strongest guy, but he's smart,
Right.
resourceful, always thinking a few steps ahead, like always has a plan.
Yeah, he's clever, not afraid to like bend the rules a little bit.
Oh yeah, a little trickery here and there if it helps him win.
So it's interesting. You have, Achilles, this like brute strength, and then you have Odysseus.
It's a good contrast.
Like what makes a good leader? What's the best approach?
Yeah, the Iliad is kind of saying there's different ways to lead. It's not all about, just being the strongest. You got to be able to adapt.
Okay, so we've got Nestor, Odysseus. No, what about the Trojans? Let's talk about Hector and Andromache. Their story it's really sad.
Yeah, it's one of the most touching parts of the Iliad.
Yeah.
You have Hector, who's like, this noble prince of Troy,
Mm-hmm.
and Andromache, his wife, who's completely devoted to him.
Right.
And they really represent, what war does to people.
Yeah. The human cost.
Yeah, there's the scene where Hector goes to see Andromache and their son Astyanax before he goes back into battle.
Oh, wow.
And, he knows he might not come back.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's that reminder that everyone has, a life outside of war.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what side you're on. Everyone has family, loved ones.
Right.
And it shows that, that those human emotions, love and fear and grief, they're universal.
Yeah.
And that's what makes their story so powerful. It reminds us that even in the middle of all this, fighting and violence, there's still these moments of tenderness, of connection.
And knowing what happens to them, it makes it that much harder.
Right.
Hector is killed, obviously, by Achilles. Andromache is taken as a slave, and their son is, well, he's thrown from the wall of Troy.
It's a tragic ending. It just shows how brutal war can be, how it can, just rip families apart. We've talked about Nestor, Odysseus, Hector, Andromache. There's another character I want to mention, someone who's always kind of at the center of things but never really gets to speak for herself.
Oh, you mean Helen?
Helen, yeah.
Right.
She's often just seen as like the victim or the temptress.
Right.
But the Iliad actually gives us a more well-rounded picture of her.
Right. She's not just this, beautiful object. She's a real person.
Yeah. She has feelings and regrets, and she feels a lot of responsibility for the war.
Yeah, you can tell she knows that she's caused a lot of pain.
And she's often criticized, blamed for everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Even though she seems to have it all. I mean, she's beautiful, she has status, but she's unhappy.
Right.
She wishes things were different.
Okay, we can't forget about the gods.
Oh, the gods, yeah.
They're like another set of characters. I mean, they're constantly interfering.
Yeah, they're always meddling.
They're shaping how the war unfolds.
Definitely. It adds a whole other level of complexity to the story. You have Zeus, who's like the king of the gods. He's trying to stay neutral. But his wife, Hera, she's on the side of the Greeks.
Right.
So she's always trying to sway him. And then you've got Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare,
Right.
always protecting her favorite Greek heroes. And then Aphrodite, goddess of love, she's trying to protect Paris.
Right. He's the one who cooked Helen.
Exactly. And don't forget Apollo, who's often on the Trojan side.
Right.
And Ares, the god of war, he just loves the chaos.
Right. Loves the fighting.
Yeah, and all of their interventions, it just makes the story so unpredictable. It makes you question, like, how much control do humans really have over their lives?
Right. It's almost like this, like, cosmic soap opera happening alongside the war.
Yeah, kind of. But speaking of the war, I am fascinated by the fighting style. How did they actually fight back then? Was it really as brutal as Homer describes?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we see these, like, massive battles, but is that accurate?
Well, Homer probably exaggerated some things, but it does give us some idea of how they fought. So imagine this battlefield where it's all hand-to-hand combat.
Wow.
Warriors just clashing with each other. No, like, trenches or anything. No organized formations. It was just like this swirling chaos. You had to rely on your training and your instincts. And chariots, they were really important.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, more than just, like, transportation.
Oh, yeah, they were like, mobile platforms for attacks. They'd use them to, disrupt the enemy, get into a good position, launch javelins, and then close in for hand-to-hand fighting.
So there was some strategy involved.
Absolutely. It wasn't just mindless fighting.
Right. Did they use, like, any specific formations?
Well, Homer doesn't get too much into the specifics of that, but he does mention, warriors fighting in groups, supporting each other, using their shields to create a wall.
It sounds like it was a brutal way to fight, but also, like, it took a lot of skill, a lot of coordination.
Yeah, and while, they celebrated individual heroes, the Iliad also shows how important teamwork was, that bond between the warriors.
Okay, but what about the mental side of it? How did these guys deal with the constant fear of, getting killed? I mean, seeing such horrible things.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And the Iliad doesn't shy away from showing us that, war takes a toll. You see these warriors dealing with, fear, grief, anger, despair.
So it takes more than just physical strength.
Yeah.
You need, like, mental strength, too.
Yeah, you got to be resilient.
So how did they do that?
Well, you see them finding support in each other.
Right.
Their comrades, that shared experience, that brotherhood that you get from fighting together.
So that helped them get through it.
Yeah. And, their religious beliefs were also important. They believed that the gods were in control, that their fates were already decided.
So faith was important.
Oh, yeah. It was how they made sense of the world, how they coped with all the uncertainty. It makes you think about how different their world was.
Yeah, totally.
How their beliefs shaped everything they did. Okay, we've talked about, the tactics and the weapons and the psychological impact of war, but what happened after the fighting? Like, how did they take care of their wounded? What about the dead?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, the Iliad gives us some glimpses into that. There are scenes where you see them, tending to the wounded, using herbs, bandages.
So there was compassion, even in the middle of all that violence.
Yeah, they weren't just, cold-hearted killing machines. They cared about each other. And the dead, treating the dead with respect was incredibly important to them.
Right.
You see these elaborate funeral rites, the warriors mourning their fallen comrades, building pyres, giving offerings to the gods.
So it was about honoring their sacrifice?
Yeah, it was crucial that they were buried properly. It was considered a huge dishonor if they weren't. And we see that, of course, with how Achilles treats Hector's body.
Right.
By refusing to return it, he's showing a complete lack of respect, and it fuels Priam's desperation to get his son back.
Yeah, that's a powerful part of the story. It shows how important rituals and tradition were, even during a war.
Yeah, they needed those rituals to, find some sense of closure, some sense of order in the middle of all that chaos and loss. We've talked about a lot when it comes to the warfare in the Iliad, but I want to go back to that idea of Kleos for a second. It's just such a different way of thinking about heroism than we have today.
Right. It was all about achieving glory.
Exactly, and for them, Kleos was everything.
Right. It's like they were trying to live forever through their actions.
Yeah, and the Iliad shows us that desire for Kleos, that it could lead to great things.
But also terrible things.
Yeah.
It's a powerful force. I wonder how all of this, like their belief in Cleos, how it affected how they viewed death.
That's a good question. The Iliad doesn't really go into detail about the afterlife.
Right.
But it does suggest that a warrior's reputation, his Kleos, that it would live on.
So like even after they died, people would remember them?
Yeah. Their stories would be told, their songs would be sung, their names would live on in the memory of their people.
So it was about leaving a legacy.
Yeah, and that idea that our actions have a lasting impact. I mean, it's a powerful concept.
It really is.
And for these warriors, the desire for Kleos, it was what drove them. It's why they were willing to risk their lives, to strive for greatness. And the Iliad it gives us this amazing look into that world, that mindset. It makes us think about what's truly important in life, what it means to leave a mark on the world.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about how a story written so long ago can still be so powerful. Make us think about why we do the things we do that need to be remembered.
Mm-hmm.
But you said earlier that the Iliad has actually shaped how we view ancient Greece. How has this one story had such a big impact?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that the Iliad is, a work of fiction. It comes from a long oral tradition, but it does give us this window into the Mycenaean world, like the time period when the Trojan War is supposed to have happened. And it's influenced how we see everything from their values to like their military tactics.
Okay, so take us back. What can we learn about Mycenaean culture from the Iliad?
One of the things that really stands out is the importance of honor, glory, reputation. These were like the core values that shaped their entire lives. Like your worth was based on what you accomplished, how much respect you had.
And that goes back to Cleos, right?
Exactly. Kleos was more than just a personal goal. It was like a societal ideal. It showed how much you contributed to your community, your place in history.
It's interesting how those values really come through and how they fought wars. It's not just about, winning land. It's about proving yourself, getting glory, defending your honor.
Right. War was a way to test yourself, like an arena where heroes could show off their courage, their skills, their loyalty.
Okay, but the Iliad also shows us a little bit about how Mycenaean society was structured. We see kings and leaders like Agamemnon and Menelaus.
Right.
They're powerful, but they also have to follow traditions and listen to the elders.
Yeah, it was a very hierarchical society, a lot of emphasis on lineage, authority, respect for tradition, and leaders were expected to, set an example, not just in battle, but in everyday life.
Right? Like they had this code of conduct, a certain way they were supposed to behave. But we also see the importance of things like hospitality, gift giving, family ties.
Yeah, those were all key parts of Mycenaean culture. They believed in strong social bonds, taking care of each other. Hospitality was like a sacred duty,
Wow.
and gifts were a way to strengthen alliances, show respect.
So even in a society that really valued warriors, they also understood the importance of, getting along, keeping the community strong.
Yeah, the Iliad reminds us that even the toughest societies are built on things like customs, shared values, a sense of belonging.
It's amazing how the Iliad, even though it's fiction, can tell us so much about a civilization that's gone.
It is, but we have to remember, there could be some bias, some exaggeration.
Right.
But when you look at the Iliad, along with, archaeological findings and other historical stuff, it helps us put together a more complete picture.
I guess that's the power of stories, right?
Yeah,
Even if everything isn't perfectly accurate, they can take us to another time and place.
for sure. The Iliad lets us connect with the ancient Greeks, understand their values, what they went through. It shows us that even though things change, some parts of being human are always the same.
Well, this has been an amazing journey through the Iliad. Thanks for taking it with me.
My pleasure. It's a story that never gets old. It's got these timeless themes and characters that, still speak to us today.
And for our listeners, I highly recommend checking out the Iliad for yourselves. It's one of those stories that'll stay with you long after you finish reading it.